Hello there Reason users, PoohBear here and welcome to my channel. And today we're going to be looking at how we can actually map a controller, and in fact I'm mapping a very old controller here. This is a Roland D70 which is early 90s. I've got this controller in, so it's over 30 years old, and as you can see I've only got 4 controls in it, but I'm actually controlling up to 16 parameters. In fact, to be perfectly honest, this particular controller, because there's only 4 faders, I could actually map up to 40 parameters from it when we do our mappings, but hey, that's another story which we will talk about a little bit later. So as I say, the whole purpose of this video is how can we get, say, old controllers mapped to devices within Reason. So this isn't specifically to do with Reason 12. Yes, I'm going to be using a combinator to do my mappings, but hey, we've got the good old mod panel, and I used to use the mod panel a lot as well. Because you only have to map these once, and then obviously you can wire them up to any devices you want. If you do use a device a lot, then maybe you should map it. But as a golden rule, you map these ones and then you can just really wire them up. Now, there are many moving parts to this, and very quickly, we've got to look at how we can actually look at the MIDI data that's actually coming from that keyboard. So once we've got that MIDI data, we can then start writing our MIDI codecs, and our MIDI codecs then has that bit of MIDI data in, and we need to decipher that, and then we sort of map that across, and then we've got ourselves some proper mapping. So hang on a second, so that one there, isn't it? So here we go, we've got a box standard map, and the interesting thing about, say, this particular mapping here, as if you can look at it and look at the numbers and all the rest of it, there's actually some documentation from RS themselves, and this is a PDF file you can actually download from their website. It's to do with all their devices and actually how they've actually mapped that out. So here's a combinator, here's rotary one, you can see they're using C, 71, 72, 73, and when we look in here, we can see exactly the same thing. So obviously this is mapped to what that document is. And by the way, it's not a real CC number in here. I'll go over that, what these numbers really are. They're more like a label, but hey, we get into that. And so we'll talk about how we can get that mapped as well. You may find it a lot easier to do the mapping, say maybe in something like Excel, because the tabs are very important. And obviously with Excel, it's very easy to get the tabs done right. So yeah. So I think what we need to do really is just go straight from the top. So the first program I'm going to mention about is for Windows users. For Mac users, you've got actually a lot of functionality already built into your OS. So you can actually do quite a bit. Now, Midi-OX is a very powerful piece of software for manipulating MIDI data which is coming into a PC. We can actually merge MIDI ports, we can split MIDI ports, we can actually capture data coming from MIDI ports and put it into a COM object, and then I can take that data from there and actually use it as shortcuts to actually do shortcuts, say within Windows itself, like zooming in and zooming out when I push a button, say on the keyboard. And yeah, so it's very powerful. But one of the things that we're going to use it for today is within actual Midi-OX, we've actually got this lovely monitor, and it's a case of that you specify your input ports. So on the right click, there's here saying MIDI devices, choose your MIDI device, that happens to be my hardware. It's going to come up here, and then you can actually go, and obviously I've moved my fader number 1 on my keyboard, and this is the data that's come out of it. Now you don't have to fully understand this data. The good thing about, I say, about a monitor is if you've got any issues with your MIDI keyboard, by coming here you can say yes, it's working, the PC's actually getting something. You may not understand what it's getting, but at least you can say I'm wiggling something, I'm getting some numbers in here, it has to be talking to the PC, so the issue you're looking at could be inside that application. So it's always a good port call when you're diagnosing things, is to say to come something like this. Now the data is quite simplish to read, so the B happens to stand for a control change, the 2 is the channel number, which happens to be channel 3. I know it says number 2. In the back end, when we deal with MIDI channels, we deal from MIDI channels from 0 to F, which happens to be 0 to 15. And the front end, you see MIDI channels from 1 to 16. So they did it that way so people didn't get confused talking about MIDI channel 0. 10 happens to be 16, so this is CC number 16. And this is the actual data from 0 to 127. That's the sort of data you see which is coming down. Midi-OX is quite nice. It does actually show you the channel number here. So it's say 3. So if that said BF, this would actually say 16 over here. And it's even giving you a little bit about what's the event you're doing. So if I was to actually hit a note on my keyboard, it'll come up there, say, hey, it's a note change. So it gives you a little bit more detail here as well. So the important thing is what I refer to as pattern matching. You don't actually have to memorize all this stuff, but the important thing is we do have a B2 and we do have a 10, and that's actually going to relate back to our codecs file. So if I was to come here and pop into my codecs file, here's a codecs file, and if we come down here, you can see here's our B2 10 and our CC 16. So what we're doing with our codec file is we're actually looking for all these different MIDI events which are going on. When it finds one and it matches it, it's going to map it to this value here, which happens to be called CC16. Now it gets a little bit confusing because we talk about CCs which have come from our MIDI controllers, and we send CCs out using the MIDI out or the EMI device. This is like what I call a stepping stone or a label, and we're just going to store it temporarily in this name, so forget that it's actually called CC16, and then we will actually do the real mapping, actual physical controller. So rotary 1 will be on the combinator, or we might want to say control this rotary here on the Hammond. So at the moment we can say, well, it's not going to work, so if I was to move my controller, it's not going to change that fader on the combinator because it's looking for CC71 to do it. I could come here and I could actually change this to a 16, as simple as that, and make sure I save the file. The file is now saved, and because this is a mappings we can easily just restart. So I've got to go into preferences, sorry. We can come here and all I need to do is just restart this surface controller, so I'm just going to stop it, start it again, and now theoretically, if I now move my controller, fader, should I say, there we go, it's working. Now these files have been set up globally, so these are not what I refer to as a user-friendly names at all. But we can give it user-friendly names. As I said, this doesn't have to be called CC16 in here. It's just that this is a global file and we can obviously attach many different controllers to use this particular MIDI codecs. So yes, my D70, it happens to be using B210, and it'll actually use 11, 12 and 13 because I've got 4 faders. That basically means I can actually delete all this other data because we don't need it. We just need this little bit of data. But the next problem is I come along with a different controller and it's talking, say, on B256. Well, it's not going to work because obviously I've deleted the data out. So at the top, we have what we call our items. As I say, you can think of these as variables, or I think of these also as a stepping stone. And by the way, this codec file is what got loaded. Let me zoom in. I actually built this codec file. This is what we installed the other day. If you actually watched that video to do with MIDI-aware codec files, if you're using a different codecs file, then obviously you need to go and find that particular version that you're going to need to edit. Any editing you do of a codec file, you have to restart Reason. Anything you do with say a remote map, you just have to start and stop it like we just did previously by going into the Surface controller. So to start with, we've got some this data here, this item data. We can actually delete all this item data out if we really wish to. I'm just going to scroll down very, very quickly for the moment. And actually I'm going to add a couple of new entries in here. And what's really important is getting the, this is a tab. You're going to hear me refer to it as white spaces. And I might use the term spacing. Don't get the term spacing confused with spaces. Yeah, so this is my spacing. And let's give it a friendly name. I'm going to call this one fader 1. We've got to give it an input type of value. And it's going to be from 0 to 127. In fact, let's add a few in. Now, there's another item I'm going to add in. I'm just going to call this one button 1. This is going to be an input type button. And this has a range from 0 to 1. Whoops. And it's just called button. Now, you get two types of buttons on controllers. You get momentary buttons. So that means when I push my button down, a CC number is going to pop out, and you'll be able to see that in Midi-OX. It pops up a number. And when you let go, Midi-OX may show you another number. And that's called a momentary control. The other one is obviously a toggle, where I'm going to push my finger down on the button. I get a value which comes into Midi-OX. I take my finger off. Nothing happens in Midi-OX. When I push my finger again, it's actually going to display a different value. And when I take my finger off, nothing gets displayed at all. So that's like called a toggle. If you've got a toggle button and you call it a button, you're going to have to press it twice to make anything happen. So if you've got a toggle button, call it button 1, but here, rather than using the word button, you use the word value, and it'd be from 0 to 127. So this is for momentary buttons. So it turns them into effectively like a toggle button. And actually on my D17, my buttons are really weird and quite unusable inside Reason, but I can do something with it, and we'll actually have a look at that anyway. So I've given these nice friendly names like fader 1, 2, 3, and 4. What I'm actually going to do now is come across back to my mappings, and we're going to actually map these out into nice friendly names. Fader 1, 2, in fact, there we go, we've got a 3 there, we can look fader 3, and we've got a fader 4, which is really cool. And the other thing we could do, we could say, hey, let's call this one button 1. So we've now given these lovely friendly names, and the advantage of giving these friendly names, that's why I'm just going to click on save, so I've saved this file, is let's say what I've got to do now is in here where, sorry, I've got to go down, sorry, the other way. So here, where I'm coming in as 10 and it's saying CC16, I've got to change this now to fader 1. I'm going to change that to fader 2, fader 3, fader 4. We're going to pull up Midi-OX. I'm going to hit a button on my D70 and we can actually track that and see what we need to change there. Now the advantage obviously by calling it fader 1, 2, say 3 and 4 is if this was a specific mapping for my D70, that's great. But then say I came along and I got myself another keyboard and I thought, well, I've written all my mapping files and they've got all these lovely names in them. Well, all I need to do is say I did come in on B219, for example, here. I can just change that CC25 to fader 1. So now that control is going to control fader 1, and fader 1 is going to control rotary 1. Yeah, so you can see why I refer to it as a stepping stone. It's going to go from here to there, and then that's going to map it. So that's why we have this extra bit. So we can actually move this around, which is independent from either side, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. So very quickly, I'm going to put in here fader 1. Now the program I'm using here is called Notepad++. It's a very powerful program. It's got lots of brilliant search facilities on it, and it's really good for doing and quite handy for doing this kind of work. So as I said, I don't know what my CC number is on my controller for some of my buttons. So let's pull up Midi-OX. So here's Midi-OX. I'm going to go and come across and just hit a button and make sure I can hit that one and that one. Yep, that's good. So here we can see it's saying B251, and they're the values it's sort of changing between. So if I was now to come over to here, and we scroll down to, here we go, 51, zoom in, so get it all on the screen. So I'm going to change that to a button 1. Cool, that's it done. Now, we've got to restart Reason, but I'm not going to restart Reason. I'm actually going to deliberately show you this failing, because obviously what I can actually do now is I can come into preferences. I can turn, oops, let's zoom in. I can turn this off and I'm going to restart it, and you can see we've actually failed. And when you look at it, it'll tell you where it's failed. So when it gives you this message here, it's a mapping file. So I know it's inside a mapping file. It even tells me line 26, 27. And if we looked at the additional lines, it'd be saying 28, 29 and 30, a mapping entry with an unknown control surface item. It doesn't know about fader 1, 2, 3, 4 or button 1 because we haven't restarted Reason, and that's what's actually inside our mapping file. So what I'm going to do now is very quickly restart Reason. So we've restarted Reason. Let's start testing our mappings. So we've got fader 1, 2, 3 and 4, brilliant, and I believe this one here should actually turn the button on and off. Yep, there we go. So there we go, it's very simple mapping, and we've already got the basics working. So before, if you notice at the beginning, I actually had my controller where I was controlling these 4 parameters. I was also controlling these 4 parameters, and then these, and then these as well. So let's actually get into that side of things, and it's going to get a little bit heavy, but hey, here we go. We can do everything we need to do, obviously, within inside this particular Notepad++ or your particular editor you want. Now, it doesn't show it very well, but if I was to actually grab all of this, he says, and I'm just going to copy this, and I'm just going to pop this into Excel. There we go. And if we just double click on a few things, lines aren't showing up very well here, are they? Does that zoom in? Oh yeah, well, there we go. Let's have you zoom in on Excel. This obviously makes a little bit more sense now what we're actually looking at because of the way it's sort of done itself. And let's move back across. We can actually see the tabbing a lot easier. Now, what we need to do over here is we're going to actually add, we're going to call it group. So this is where we're going to put our group in, and that's how we can get it to work on multiple faders. So I'm actually going to do a bit of the program here, and then there's actually some extra stuff we need to add at the top. So let me just sort of build this first, and I'm actually going to just delete this out, this bottom bit. I'm sort of cheating. And Excel being Excel, it's really nice because obviously when I extend this out, it's automatically going to change the rotary numbers for me. So these would be all the extra controls, say I was adding on to the combinator. I said I wanted to do 16, let's just do 16. Now this is going to be a little bit different because I'm still going to want to be calling it fader 1 to 4, fader 1 to 4, fader 1 to 4, fader 1 to 4, which is cool. And this bit here I can just drag down. Now, if I was to save this, it will actually error because it's going to say fader 1 is already assigned. So fader 1 is assigned to rotary 1, and fader 1 at the moment is assigned to rotary 5, and this will actually fail in the state it is. However, we've got something which is called grouping. I think, if I remember rightly from the original documentation, they refer to it as variations. I refer to it as pages because I like to think of it as a page. So on page, and I am going to call it a page, on page 1, this is where fader 1 is going to affect this rotary, and fader 4 is going to affect that rotary. On page 2, fader 1 is going to affect this rotary, so on and so forth. Then on page 3, it's going to affect that rotary, and then on page 4, it's going to affect that rotary. And that's how I like to do it. So I'm going to call this page 1, and they all associate to page 1 to start with, which is really cool. And then the next one is, this is actually going to be page 2. This is going to be page 3. And the final one, page 4. So now they've all got their own associated pages. So it means we won't get that horrible error, but it'll actually an error because it won't know what this grouping actually means here. So this is where we are actually going to add ourselves an extra line. So I'm just going to quickly push myself an extra line in here. As I say, you can do all of this in your Notepad++. I just feel it's a little bit easier to show you in here because of, I say, it's already tabbed out nicely for us. So what we need to do is write this statement here called define group. The next column is actually going to be our group name. This can be anything, but we're going to give it actually a very, very specific name in a second. And then we're going to give it its values. Page 1, page 2, page 3. And do you know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to give this page 4 here, and I'm going to put page 5 here. Sorry, page 1 here. And the reason I've deliberately done that is when we compile this up and run this, as default, faders 13, 14, 15 and 16 are going to be default. So when I move my faders on my D70, these are the rotaries which are going to actually move as default because page 4 happens to be first. If I left page 1 first, then it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just wanted to demonstrate that at the same time as doing this. Now the name, as I said, is important. When we use what's called a Lua code, we can obviously call things different names, and we can. This will actually work. This one actually fell, but at the same time, this is not going to actually do much. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to give this a very, very special name, and the spacing and everything, or the spaces in this particular case, is very, very, very important. It's going to be called keyboard space shortcut space and variations. Got to put that S on the end, and let me just open this up so we can just double check that everything's spelled correctly. You get anything spelled incorrectly wrong, then this will actually fail to work. So what this special keyword is if we go and have a look at some reason documentation. So this is the key command file, and actually here this is where it's referring to as switch to one of the 10 corresponding global remote variations, keyboard shortcut variations, and it gives you the commands here. So you need to do command plus option on the Mac, and on the PC you do control plus alt, and then you do 1 to 0 along the top. It's not the number pad if I remember rightly, I think it has to be along the top. So on the Mac obviously you go control option and then hit number 1, blah blah blah. And that's going to choose page number 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, what happens if you say go, you have to be on Windows and you go Control Alt 5? We haven't got a page 5 set up, so no, nothing will actually happen. Doesn't break or anything else, just it just doesn't happen. So let's actually grab what we've got here to prove that this all works now. So I'm going to grab this. I'm just going to do copy, and let's paste this into our mapping file. So we've got that here. The fact that it's a mapping file, let's remember to save it. We can just come in and we should be able to just restart our Surface controller. So MIDI, it's right down the bottom, I know that much. There it is. So stop that and restart it. Great, we haven't got any errors. And theoretically, because we've restarted it, everything should be reset. These, if I got it right, should be the controls which are going to move. Here's a moment of truth. Yeah, hey, there they go. They're moving. And what I'm going to do now, if I can bring my keyboard just down here. If I do Control-Alt-2, these controls here should be the ones which move. Cool. Control-Alt-3 would be obviously 9 to 12. However, Control-Alt-4 is going to be the 1 to 4. Because obviously that's the order we set the pages up. Because we set up as page 4, then we went to 2, 3, 1. So obviously, but calling it 1, 2, 3, 4, Control-Alt-1 would then be page 1, 2, 3, 4. But I wanted to demonstrate that you could actually change the order of things and play around. So let's actually have a quick look at another quick mapping, as we've done a lot of the legwork. And this is where things start to speed up a bit. So if we just come here and scroll all the way to the bottom, So in all the mapping files at the very bottom, I've actually got the Hammond already sort of mapped out for you. But as you can see, they're saying things like CC 12, 13, 14, 15, which obviously is not much joy to us. So we can quite simply here come in here and change this to fader 1, 2, 3, 4. And obviously we can come down to the B line and do this the same thing, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we can obviously put our pages in as well. So let me just go ahead and quickly do that. Obviously I can go along and I can populate all the others up as well, but for quickness, let me just quickly just compile this up. So we need to save this. Let's come in and restart the Surface controller. Oh, right near the bottom, isn't it? There we go. Turn it off. Turn it back on. And we've hit on this error, which is, hey, this is quite cool because we can actually, when things all work well, when you're sort of doing these videos and you do something wrong, you can find yourself scratching your heads. I think I know what I've done here, so let's actually have a quick look at the mapping file. It told me the lines which to look at, which obviously happen to be these lines here, and it said it was an unknown. Let me say, I think it was is that what it said? It said it was unknown. Let's move this down quickly. An unknown group value. Okay. And what I've actually forgotten to do here is, obviously, I did not define my group. I've actually specified things, but I didn't define my group. So that's why we got that error. So I'm going to just go up here and I'm just going to copy this line because I'm lazy like that. That can go in there, put that group in there, that line in there. Go save, cool, here. Okay, let's restart it again. And we should really be working, he says. Oh yeah, I've locked the device to that one, so let me just quickly unlock that device. I'm going to come over here. And we might have to change our grouping to something like 2 to start with, maybe. Yep, so there we go. So you can see we're working there, and because I said page 2, I made a mistake and I've left page 2 on Alt 4, haven't I? So there we go. So it's working, so we can just map it out. So that was my fault. I forgot to define that group. I just happened to be doing the pages. So I say I've confused things because I was trying to be clever to show you and demonstrate you with the group name. So try and keep things nice and straightforward. You don't have to call them page 1, page 2, page 3 and page 4. You can call them whatever you want. I know some people might refer to these as, oh, that's my LFO, these are my envelope groups, these are my filters, and that's how they actually put their pages together. I just prefer page 1, 2, 3 and 4. It just makes perfect sense for me. Okay, so we've absolutely covered loads and loads and loads in this particular video. It's gone on for a lot longer than I expected, but I'm not surprised because there is so much to go on. I mean, the best thing we take from it is the simple case that we've used Midi-OX in this particular case. We can find our MIDI data. We match that to our codecs files, so that'd be there. He says, let's click on the right screen. We map that to our codecs files and do what we need to do there, and then we obviously create ourselves a mapping and we map that across to here as well. As I say, my codecs files and my mapping files may look a little bit bigger and a little bit different. It's because I tried to make them a little bit more globally, but you can obviously come in and change things and do whatever you want with them. Just bear in mind if we make any changes going forward that it might affect what you've done, but obviously I'd flag anything for that, so you could just copy and paste it. Burbling again as usual. Anyway, I hope you find this somewhat useful. As I say, this is how we can obviously do it in the mod panel. Hopefully you've got more than just 4 faders or 4 knobs. It doesn't matter if you've got knobs or faders. You can call them the same thing because in reason really a fader and a knob is one and the same thing. The only other thing I haven't touched on, and I'll probably do another video where I get out my Nectar, because my Nectar has got an endless encoder on it, and there's an option when we create items, sorry, so I should have been in this file here, when we create items at the top, There's another value here where we can use a value called delta, and that's actually to do with our index encoders, so we'll have a look at that as well. So anyway, all I can say is thank you for watching, and bye for now.